It's a rainy day here in Georgia, and I'm going to talk about the Nikon F3. The camera initially in 1980, when it was first released, a lot of professional photographers, a lot of Nikon photographers, photojournalists, those types of dudes were a bit apprehensive about the camera, and that was mainly due to how this camera is mostly an electronic camera. Even though it's manual focus and manual advanced without the motor drive, there's still tons of electronics powering the insides. The shutter is electronically controlled. And at first, a lot of those professional photographers were a bit apprehensive since they were just used to manual everything. It was a very tried and true method, but it didn't take long for everyone to realize that this camera will survive almost anything. You can drop it, take it in any condition, any working environment, and it'll still fire and keep going. It was designed by famous Italian car designer Giuseppe Giugiaro. Even into the 90s, there were still professional photographers shooting on the F3, despite the fact that you had the F4 and then eventually the F5, which introduced autofocusing, an even more advanced light meter built into the camera. Basically, almost any modern day function that you can imagine in a DSLR that the F4 and F5 were already having, there were still photographers still shooting on the F3 just due to the fact that it was insanely reliable, built like a tank, and like I said, it will just keep going. My copy here specifically has the MD4 motor drive, which gives it this huge chunkiness right here. Takes 8 AA batteries to power it, but it does allow you to shoot in single mode, or if you feel like killing off a roll of film in approximately 6-7 seconds, you can also shoot in continuous mode, which lets you shoot 5 frames a second. The MD4 motor drive also allows you to have an amazing grip. Whether you have big hands, small hands, when you reach onto this thing, it's not letting go. Or I should say, you're not letting go. Not only does the MD4 allow you to shoot in single and continuous mode, it also gives you the feature of power rewind. So my copy of the F3 also has this 20mm f3.5 wide-angle lens on it. It's specifically the pre-AI lens, and that's another thing about this camera. You can mount both pre-AI, AI, autofocus lenses, as long as it's the D, mainly because you need an aperture ring. Basically, any Nikon lens made for the F mount, if it has an aperture ring, you can use it on this camera. The only caveat is that if it's a pre-AI lens, you won't get any automatic exposure. You won't get the auto meter built into the camera. You'll be shooting solely manual. The light meter in this camera is an 80-20 center weighted meter. That basically means that whatever you point this at, there'll be like a circle in the viewfinder that you'll see, and more or less 80% of the meter will be focusing on that within the circle, and then 20% on everything else in the image, and that more or less acts like a spot meter at that point. However, it's still fairly accurate, and most of the time, whatever you point at and shoot, you're still going to come away with really accurate exposures. When it comes to photos taken on this camera, I'll have a slideshow playing of photos throughout the video, but I did want to show you guys some darkroom prints that I made from this camera. These photos are from a shoot that I did recently at a local beach park here in Georgia with a friend of mine. This was shot with the F3 here, motor drive, but also with the 300mm f2.8 lens. And from my own research, it's a lens that a lot of photographers back from the 80s and 90s who did a lot of swimsuit photography, so basically like Sports Illustrated swimsuit from that era, when it came to doing a lot of cover shots or stuff for big spreads, posters, that was the lens of their choice. And I believe it was mainly just due to a 300mm lens on this camera compresses the background so much that anything that's in frame and in focus becomes the only focus of the image. And just due to the quality and the rendering of that lens, just portraiture, you would never think a 300mm 2.8 would look good for portraiture, but it definitely works some magic. And since I've gotten that lens, doesn't matter film or digital, I've just been rocking that lens whenever I do stuff on the beach, or even anything where I just want more of kind of like a classic high fashion look, where I just want like the model to be the only focus. That is definitely something that I've done and will keep doing. As far as features in the camera that I can point out, you just have like your generic just shutter dial up here. ISO is controlled by this small ring by here. You even have exposure compensation right here should you shoot in just aperture priority mode. The viewfinder is detachable. I believe there were something like 5 or 6 different viewfinder attachments that you can add. That was in part to the fact that the Nikon film flagship cameras, the F series, were meant to be completely modular, which meant you could take the lens off, you could remove the back, add a battery grip, remove the top. There was even a 250 exposure film back, which made this thing like just big, very big. NASA even took this camera, modded it out a little bit, and took it up to space for many different missions, until finally the F4 came out and they used the F4 NASA edition as well as the F5 NASA edition. I have had this camera now for 9 years, almost going on 10 years. This was actually my 18th birthday present from my dad. He used to shoot on an F3 back in the 80s, and by the time I got into photography, especially film photography, he kind of knew exactly what to get. Now, when he got me the camera, it was just body alone with a 28mm lens. And well, since then I've mainly just stuck to Nikon, which meant I've just been growing out this kit more and more. And it actually hasn't been until recently, this past year, that I've actually really gotten back to this camera and just enjoyed how much of just a workhorse it is, and just how good it feels, especially with this battery, just how good it feels in the hand. And just again, just how satisfying that motor drive sounds. So that is all that I have to say on this camera. There are plenty of other great YouTube channels out there like Analog Insight, who did a full rundown recently of this camera, the history. This is more just my experience, just overall kind of just like fun facts, I guess, about the camera that if you're a big fan that you should at least know about. Yeah, but if any of you are experienced with the F3, leave a comment below. Like the video if you like what you see, and subscribe. It'll help me out a lot.